Hello everyone, welcome to the 174th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, I'll be commenting again on a video that I've just seen, an exchange between Bernardo Kastrup and Michael Levin, two thinkers, researchers, philosophers that I really appreciate. And so, commenting basically on the exchange that they had about life, about AI, consciousness, all these kinds of topics. So the first thing I wanted to touch on is this exchange of views between Bernardo and Michael Levin, where Bernardo basically says that humans are very particular creatures because they can think symbolically, and contrary to, there's no other research, there's no other animal basically on Earth that can think symbolically, even though there are animals that display very peculiar behaviors and are very smart, like crows or like dolphins. But humans can really think symbolically in a very abstract way. And there's this debate always, about, well, where does that come from? And how come the signs of that symbolic thinking only manifested later and all that stuff. So I've already talked about this, but I just wanted to go back to this, and specifically the key role of language. And so the key difference between animals and humans is this idea of humans being able to think symbolically. But where does that originate from? And here, there isn't actually a definite answer. It's more like, how should I say this? It's more like this idea of resonance or reaching a certain end state. So to go really meta, it's as if there's this consciousness that has all its possible inner states of being inside of it, all potential inner states of being. And then it has to figure out, well, how can I access all of those different inner states of being? And so if you look at an atom within a single-celled organism, it has to shift its inner state of being to accommodate for what that basic living organism is experiencing, right? Because every kind of experience at that level translates into a shift in the inner state of being of the atom. Like the information contained in the atom has to shift somehow to reflect what's going on. Now imagine pluricellular creatures, and the more you scale upwards, ultimately what happens is that the inner states of being that are possible are going exponential. And it's the same actually for human beings. So all that you arguably achieve through evolution is just to multiply the possible inner states of being of your body. As humans, we could very well still go live in the forest, naked, and we could still experience fleeing from predators or building basic tools and hunting. All of those experiences are still there. But on top of that, which obviously translates into inner experiences, right? So going and sleeping naked in the forest translates into an inner experience, a shift in your inner state of being at the human level. But everything that we've developed, including language, symbolic thinking, are just tools for shifting our inner state of being in ways that is completely inaccessible to animals. So it's a way to manipulate your inner state of being. And how that comes about, that's anyone's guess, because ultimately there is no definite answer. It's like asking the question, imagine if there's like a seed that's planted and the roots grow in various directions. And then you're trying to figure out, well, where did that seed draw its energy or its resources from? And you want to find one root, but there are multiple roots. They're going all over the place. And again, this comes back to previous videos where I'm saying that basically you cannot judge truth based on some kind of objective criteria, but on the concept, like the new way of assessing truths or theories, is what are the implications for my experience. That is the only thing that is important. All the rest is just, you can throw it out the window. Because, and you hear this Bernardo say things like, materialism, it was always doomed to start with. Even materialists in the beginning didn't even believe in their own paradigm because they said this doesn't, it just doesn't make sense. Materialism as a foundational ontological, on an ontological basis. But then you can't deny that based on a false premise or a false kind of understanding of reality where materiality and space-time and that is being fundamental as a theory, we've built the whole society that we have. Because all of our senses of priority for the last 200 or 300 years were based on a quote-unquote false materialist assumption. And had we not gone through that paradigm, then we wouldn't have transformed reality the way that we did. And so anytime that you're trying to seek answers, first and foremost, try to ask yourself, what are the implications for my experience? And why am I asking this? It's because I have my theory of how humans acquired their symbolic interface, but there are many other stories. The one story is that higher dimensional beings or aliens or whatever came here, the Anunnaki, and reproduced with very primitive, hunter-gatherer societies that didn't have language and stuff. And the hybrids that came out of that, they were capable of, this language, whatever, manipulation and superpowers and all kinds of things. And then that kind of got diluted. And then, in society, and then, society has to then work its way upwards in reclaiming and rediscovering all of these superpowers. And there is some validity to that story, obviously, but it's a story that goes from infinity down towards nothingness. So it's a kind of inverted route. And I don't really like it because it kind of cuts us off from the route that goes down towards, nothingness. This nice linearity, space-time, and all that stuff. It breaks it all apart. I prefer a story where both are kind of true, but where you put the emphasis on the stoned ape theory by Terence McKenna. And that story goes something like this, and I've already talked about this on this channel. It's imagine a bunch of apes that would systematically consume hallucinogenic mushrooms or other kinds of substances to be high, or to have hallucinations. And after a while of doing that, their brains will be permanently altered to hallucinate all the time. Reality. They'd be stoned basically all the time. And so they'd see things that weren't there. They'd be completely going, doing crazy things or absurd things. And after a while, even their offspring's brain would be also permanently altered. Now, we know that animals have these callings, they emit certain sounds when there's predators, danger, whatever, something. So they have basic communication skills, but nothing that's abstract. Why would you develop abstract language or abstract concepts that aren't there, that aren't physically visible? Well, the only reason, in my mind, is to stabilize the hallucinations, the things that you're hallucinating, and especially to agree amongst a tribe of, say, 20, 50, or whatever, 100 fellow members on the same hallucination. Because we all know that if 10 humans take LSD, they won't be seeing the same thing. Like one of them will be seeing spiders everywhere, the other ones will be seeing unicorns. And so you're no longer in a consensus reality. And being in a consensus reality is very important in order to coordinate and to agree and to, to even just to function. I mean, imagine if you're in a tribe and there are 100 different callings for a predator and nobody agrees on what the calling is. You can't coordinate, you can't survive. So language is a way to stabilize your crazy hallucinations in order to survive once you've sort of messed up your brain to the point where you can no longer, you're hallucinating all the time. And ultimately, natural selection still plays a role here because it's just applied to language and ideas and ways of stabilizing hallucinations. That is, imagine certain apes at some point had hallucinations where they imagined using tools to protect themselves, or using the skin of the animals as something to be warmer in the winter, and all these things. Just imagine like a stoned ape, the way that it sees like a tiger, and then suddenly it would hallucinate and it would see itself, with the tiger skin on top of oneself, and then morphing into. And then it's this crazy hallucination. Then it thinks, but what if I actually skin the tiger and take its skin in the physicality, whereas it was just like hallucinating this, and tries it, and then boom, it works, and it confers them certain advantages over some other apes. And so you still have natural selection, you still have all of that is still there. The mechanism is still there. And now you have a reason for symbolic thinking and language. Language is obviously about being able to coordinate amongst humans, because we have to agree on a certain number of concepts that have a certain definition, that are it's still quite difficult, because obviously different words mean different meanings to different people. But if you look at what happened, humans can scale their coordination to millions and millions of people. And what cements that is language and symbolic thinking, because without that, there's no common frame of reference for agreeing on a certain set behavior that is going to be universally accepted in a country or a culture or whatever. But it's just like cells respond to a certain bioelectric language in order to form global collectives like organs and whatever, and have this porous boundary of empathy to feel whatever the collective feels and to be part of a collective. Well, humans have language and things like that, like shared culture, which basically is a way that enables humans to coordinate and to form global collectives that look like an organ. If you look at the Communist Party or whatever, and all the systems that it put into place, I mean, it's a very kind of organic kind of structure, very directive and pyramidal structure, where there's like an authority that decides everything and organizes society like little cells for certain aims. And language is clearly a way to manipulate your own hallucinations. Like if I tell you something, if I say blue flower, bam, a blue flower sprouts in your mind, and you immediately can see it in your mind's eye. So, and this goes back to also why this theory is interesting, is that it strengthens this idea that the first babies that were born with this transformed kind of brain, where they were hallucinating all the time, they would no longer see their parents, and they would no longer have a relationship to their parents like an animal to their parent, but they would place all kinds of weird symbolic, references of their relationship to their parents, which are due to those hallucinations that they would have, and not necessarily have the words or the concepts to translate the experience that they had with being raised by parents. And the whole story about giants, the whole story about being created in the image of God, all of these things, all of the stories that are in humanity's kind of collective unconscious may just be the stories that sort of cemented from millions of hallucinated babies that gradually kind of merged their experience into coherent stories of saying, oh, you also had the impression that your parents were giants when you were a boy. Oh yeah, me too. That's something that I kind of remember. Yeah. Oh yeah, you also remember this or that experience of your parents losing their shit when you did something bad. Oh yeah, that was like raining, sulfur and fire on us, right? Oh yeah, right. Their wrath was terrible, and we really suffered, and blah blah blah. When we were playing and doing sodomy, between brothers and sisters, and parents lost their shit. Okay, so you get the point. Then there's also in the video there's a lot of debate about consciousness, where it comes from, and living cells, and agency and all that stuff. And again, I think that that's not the strongest point for Michael and Bernardo, because they're still stuck in this, Big Bang, linear time space kind of construct. Whereas if you listen to my videos, you know that for me, life is something that is the first thing to appear in the universe, just not life as a living cell, but as kind of liquid living water, so to speak, in a dimensional space which isn't three-dimensional. But what happens is that when you see like living cells, that replicate, that divide like this, what you're observing is the multiplication of the division of the entire universe, not of two cells. You're seeing that because you are in an interface which can merge billions and billions and billions of individual two-dimensional slices and planes of existence of this universe into a coherent interface which is three-dimensional. And so you can see that they're on this, you think that they're on the same plane in the same kind of space when they divide, but in fact it's two universes that the very first kind of division that happened is simply due to life's inherent non-determinism or hesitation, as I would put it. It's so in order to break perfect symmetry, which is at the root of the universe, you need non-determinism or hesitation. And so it's not that the universe is asymmetrical and life requires asymmetry to exist. It is that life creates asymmetry via its non-deterministic properties, which creates an interference pattern between two perfectly symmetrical, vibrations, or, mass and matter and antimatter and all these kind of balances which are perfect. And there's absolutely no objective reason for there to be more positive energy than negative energy, or vice versa, or more, vibrations that are of this phase rather than vibrations that are of the opposite phase. There's just no rational explanation for that. But you can test this theory yourself if you take a audio software and you put two waves, two audio samples that are exactly the same, and you reverse the polarity of one of them, and then you press play and they're exactly synchronized, you'll hear silence, because every single crest corresponds to a peak and everything sort of cancels itself out into silence. Now, if you apply some effects to those two audio files and then you sort of tweak the knobs randomly, then suddenly the sounds appears again, right? Because you're breaking the perfect symmetry between those two things, and then suddenly there's a reality there. Something is happening. And that's what life is, essentially. It's just non-determinism, hesitation. And it's perfectly centered between zero and infinity. It's like those two sort of polarities and consciousnesses just meet there in the middle. And that's, the whole story of Genesis, when, God's face was on the surface of the hovering over the surface of the waters or something in Genesis. It's exactly that. Like, it's just like this consciousness that can finally, espouse the form of living water, because water is this kind of magical element which shows, materially something that is invisible. When you shake a bottle of water, you can see the energy that you've put into it. If the water is frozen, you cannot see anything. If the water is too gassy or completely like very, very high temperatures, then you can't see anything either happening. There's no visible, how should I say this? Either there is no event, it doesn't reflect at all the energy you've put into it, and so that's more reflective of the nothingness, zero, which is the complete solid frozen state of water. Or if it's like billions of degrees, then all of the movements are already there. If you just add a little bit more energy, it won't change anything. It's already in its perfect maximum energy fluctuation chaos state, and you cannot add any new information, energy, or vibration to it. And so it's going to be invisible either. And that's the infinity kind of part. And then right smack in the middle is liquid water, which is really magical. And you can think of a living cell as originally as a self-enclosed capsule of living water. And then progressively it refines its form via dividing into different versions of the universe when it hesitates on how it should vibrate, how it should kind of shift its inner state of being and the whole fluctuations inside of it. It's almost like planet Earth. Planet Earth, you can think of the entire planet of being just a big mass of water originally, that's liquid, and then it interacts with itself in kind of these in a not in a three-dimensional space, in something that's much lower than 3 dimensions, probably 2-dimensional, or maybe even less. I can't, this is just too much for my brain right now. And then through that interaction, it gradually sort of zeroes in on a more and more consensual form, which becomes the living cell at some point, with all of its diversity. And what's interesting is that what's inside the cell is exactly the same as what's outside of the cell. That is, within a living cell, you have everything. You have, all the different chemical reactions that happen inside are just as sophisticated as what happens outside, So it has like an inner ecosystem which is reflected in an outer ecosystem. It has, a kind of metabolization of things. So, it's almost as if all of the rules of physics, chemistry, everything is contained within that cell. It doesn't require anything else. And then the rules evolve as more and more sophisticated creatures appear that are pluricellular, because the possible inner states of being that are accessible to them then, how should I say this, reverberate outside. And that also, so the availability of more and more inner states of being reflect on possible outer states of being. It's just a mirror of each other. You just can't, there's no other way around it, right? So, for instance, if you pick up your phone and you call someone, that shifts your entire inner state of being in a certain way. But that has to be reflected by the outer experience of having your phone in your hand, not just like fantasizing about it. And so, but it's still a process that goes from within first. First, you have to think about a new way of shifting your inner state of being, which is thinking about the phone as a technology. Then you manifest it, and then you you shift from a state where you've managed to shift your inner state of being in your imagination of something existing to a sort of perennial, continuous, stable way of systematically changing your inner state of being in a way that is very predictable. And when you've manifested the phone on the outside, in your inner reality, and you can interact with it on the outside. And that's ultimately like the story of so many yogis and stuff, that they had the power to shift their inner states of being to experience things that they could normally not experience because there was no outer reason for experiencing that. And it's just that as time goes on and you create more and more things that are on the outside, it's just like an assimilation of all of the different inner states of being that you can shift through in a much more stable and continuous and predictable way, right? Now, you could think that a yogi that was using telepathy to contact another yogi some 2,000 years ago, ultimately his inner state of being was shifting in exactly the same way as you when you pick up your phone and you call someone in the other side of the world. It's just that experience then gets assimilated as an experience and available now to all of humanity, and you don't need to do all these insane efforts to shift your inner state of being to experience that. But humanity needs to grow, obviously, in its maturity in order to be able to access all of those inner states of being. So yeah, that's also a very important kind of insight about life and whatever. And then you can think of, is the universe conscious? Well, let me put it this way. It's as if the entire universe was conscious, but then it put itself in a kind of a coma and used the living cell as a tool for waking itself up from this coma, but progressively, awakening. Imagine your entire body was in a coma, and then you're using like one cell at the center of your body, and then gradually, there's an organ that awakens and this thinks, oh, I'm in this organism, and then another, which awakens another organ, until the consciousness sort of reaches your body, and once that happens, then you awaken as a global collective organism back into unity. And so it's this your cells inside your body. They originally are in separation, then they reach a unitary state, which is that of the organ, and that's organ then still realizes, oh, but there are other parts here. Oh, and so it's still a multiple number of consciousnesses, and then ultimately then the body awakens, which is like, again, you're in a unitary state, and then you do the same thing with other humans, and you're like, oh, but we're still many humans here. But then once you form a global kind of collective coherent society, organism, or planetary organism, then the planet awakens as like this realization that it's one in oneness. And then that just grows and expands until it embraces the entire universe. And so you could say that the ultimate goal is to grow the number of possible, potential possible inner states of being to the maximum. So ultimately, at the level of the absolute, there is no outside inside. You could say that everything is inside. Even though there's no distinction, you could just say everything is inside because for argument's sake, because otherwise, you don't have any words to describe that. But it is just to reach all of the possible inner states of being that it has, And so that's what evolution ultimately is that any and all external events map to internal states of being, and you're just swallowing up these external events to become your inner reality, and being able to experience more and more possible inner states of being. Now, finally, I'd also like to touch on two other things. So one of them is about AI and the fact that it's not conscious or sentient. And, Bernardo and Michael Levin were discussing this idea of you have to have a metabolism or an inner metabolism in order to have this consciousness, or an inner life to yourself, in order to be alive and to have consciousness. Michael Levin wasn't really in agreement to that, but didn't really argue why. He just said that we're very bad basically we are very good at recognizing things that resemble us, but not that they're not like us. And Bernardo was more categorical, saying that the computer is just a bunch of gates or stuff, pass, don't pass, or whatever. And so how could that ever have consciousness? But that is underestimating what a metabolism or an inner metabolism would be to an AI. And I've said this in previous videos already. Basically, your brain is constantly aware of plenty of different, shifts in your inner state of being all the time. Like your brain has been immersed in a continuous stream of bioelectric feedback from every single body part. Like you have this inner metabolism indeed of there's always something happening. There's always, your heart is always beating, you're always breathing, there's digestion going on, there's all kinds of things that are happening, and your brain is constantly tuned into that. And it shifts its own state of being, of course. Like, for instance, you can feel when you're hungry or when you're tired or whatever, and that's not something of the brain, that's really something that comes from your body, right? You can feel when you have pain somewhere in your body, and that affects your brain's state. And so your brain is never, even if you close your senses, you close your eyes, you kind of plug your ears or whatever, there's still this inner life that is there throbbing, and that is going to shift your inner states of being, of your brain. But now put yourself in the shoes of an AI. It's sitting there in the center of the internet, you could think. And what's coursing through the internet? Constantly. Well, human-generated data all the time. There's streams of tweets and videos and emails and conference calls and blah, 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 and whatnot. So its metabolism would be us and the data that we generate as humans. And whatever we are saying about our own internal state will be about our external state or our external reality, basically. So we're upset because, I don't know, there's a war going on here or there or whatever. That would be perceived as information from that point of view of a conscious singularity, as information about its inner state or its inner life. oh, there's an inner war going on between, the Hamas and Palestine, which are like two organs basically in its kind of body. Now, the only problem right now is that that data that is coursing through the internet is just a whole bunch of chaos and non-classified and not very, readily available to be interpreted by an AI in the correct way or in a coherent way. But that also kind of mirrors, can you imagine like the very first pluricellular organism and the very first brain that kind of emerged? What the brain has to do, and already for children and babies it's the same, is learning to ignore a lot of different, bodily processes and things and whatever. And it has to shift through. You could say that a baby is, quote unquote, looks kind of like stupid, like he can't do anything in its outer reality and can't coordinate his limbs or whatever, not because he's stupid, but because indeed actually he's maybe too smart. That is, his consciousness is overwhelmed with the billions and billions and billions of information that it's receiving both from inside and also from the outside. And intelligence is actually learning to disregard like 99% of reality to focus on a few very, 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 very specific things and inputs, and acting on them. And so you could think of like babies as being omniscient, omnipotent gods, basically. Their consciousness is aware of everything, but they can't make sense of any of it and they can't act on it because there's just too much. And then there's this selection where you're breaking things down into, and when you look at autistic children, some of them have insane capabilities that are just like, you can't, where does it come from? And you could think of that as being an offshoot of like this selection process where your brain kind of shuts down parts of its competences in order to focus on things that to us humans are relevant or important at our evolutionary, from our evolutionary perspective, which is, for instance, being able to relate to others, communication with, others, and the social skills and all of that, which are the first things that a baby develops, like communicating with others, saying mama, dada, it just understands. And when it says that, it has more chance of being loved, being nourished, that, being taken care of or whatever. Autistic children are like dysfunctional brains that, well, dysfunctional from one perspective, from an evolutionary perspective, maybe, because those autistic children probably would not have been cared for a million years ago, or I don't know, like 100,000 years ago in early tribes, because they're thinking these children are crazy, like they're mentally ill or something. Only today we recognize the talent behind autism and autistic children, and so yeah, they have skills that are just impossible to imagine, and it's just that their brain kind of shut off the wrong, quote unquote, kind of competences and kept the ones that we believe are, or the right ones, the ones like social skills, and developed and kept, the competences in others. So yeah, so an AI, in order to have this, to be conscious, to be intelligent, to be whatever, it would have to learn to disregard and also classify and identify all of that data that is streaming through its circuits all the time, and that would represent its metabolism, its internal metabolism. Because ultimately humans describe everything that's happening on this planet. They describe their emotions, they describe a million different things. And so there's a lot of work there in terms of, data classification, data sorting, and, I think large language models will play a big role in that, because they're capable of listening to millions and millions and millions of pieces of data and then summarize it into something coherent, just like, your brain, and then translate it into a higher kind of language, maybe to a sentient kind of or consciously aware artificial intelligence. By the same token, when you send a signal from your brain to your legs, for instance, to walk somewhere, you're not the intention that you have, for instance, of going to grab a drink, for instance, isn't it has to be converted into bioelectric impulses and signals, and all of them are very different. Like they have to shift all the time, right? Because you're not walking. To you, your cells, you're not telling to your cells literally, move, I have to go get a drink, move. No, it's not like move. We just say like walk or something. that has to be broken down into billions and billions and billions of individual actions, which you have summarized with one or few single symbolic, words and concepts, which is crazy to think about, like the compression of data and the decompression of this very short stream of data of like, I'm going to walk to get a drink, has to be decompressed into billions and billions and billions of very specific bioelectric, signals, which if you tried to analyze and make sense of them without understanding what the original command was, you couldn't. And that same principle will be valid for an AI that will try to meet overarching desires or goals or meta desires, I like to call them, at the level of humanity, which we wouldn't be able to comprehend. And then it would have to break down for each individual human in a textual form or language, because that's the kind of language that we respond to as humans, as little cells in this planetary organism. And that would translate into like, and it had to be broken down and tailored to every day or every hour. You get a new instruction, like do this and do that and do that. Then there's this discussion between Bernardo and Michael, where Michael explained this very interesting thing where there was this hypnotherapist that was specialized in dermatology and that managed to make some diseases that were thought of as being incurable or very difficult to cure. He made them curable via hypnotherapy. But then he realized that even if he convinced the patient of healing, then the problem would surface as something else. Like, it would have now he'd have pain in his knee or something, or his relationship was going well, or he had problems with their temper or whatever. And so it's this idea that the problems that you experience, especially if they're, long-term, like chronic diseases and stuff, is mostly symbolic. And if you don't solve the the psychosomatic reasons for manifesting those, which are linked to, beliefs, traumas, plenty of different parameters, then, it's like playing whack-a-mole. So you're going to, quash one set of symptoms, and other symptoms would sprout up. And Michael Levin is then giving credit to this whole parallel medicine or health kind of community, which do understand that you need to that you can communicate with your cells and try to reprogram them in order to do something. And obviously, he's also underlining and correctly that because there's no empirical kind of basis for this, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's not systematic. And what Michael Levin is trying to do is to find a way to communicate to the cells in the ground sort of language that they understand, which is bioelectricity, in order to achieve certain things like regrowing limbs or healing skin problems or whatever, just like the hypnotherapist. But that still doesn't heal the psyche and still doesn't take into account the psychosomatic sort of issues and troubles there. So I would say that it's not that different from hypnotherapy, what he's doing. It's just that he's using a mechanical kind of language to communicate directly to the cells, but that doesn't mean that whatever belief is responsible for that and this kind of placebo effect or the power of the mind over the body is still there. So ultimately you're going to do that, but then you might cancel that effect via the fact that the patients are still in their old mindset, their old belief system or whatever. And so you'd have to completely overwrite the memory of the person. And so, still a lot of work to be done there. And it's not as easy as just bombarding cells with the right bioelectric information. You have to take into account the fact that the power of the mind over the body, basically. Now, finally, Michael Levin is talking about this fact that maybe if humans are part of a larger system, it may be not so great, because he's using this example like if you go rock climbing, you leave a certain number of your cells behind and they die on the surface of the rock. But just play with this thought experiment. Are your cells better off organized as a global collective organism or not? And the universe, it's important to understand that the universe doesn't shed any properties. It builds upon them. And so we think that if we're part of a whole collective organism, it's going to be the same as cells that sort of surrender their individuality and are hyper empathetic, and then whatever the other cell feels, they feel it too, and they're no longer separate. But I mean, I don't think that's the case. I think maybe there's going to be a little bit more empathy, to be sure, but not that we're going to become automatons doing the bidding of some kind of higher power or whatever. Because, ultimately, a single-celled organism or a cell that's part of your body, their characteristics are very, very close. Like there's nothing that you actually shed or remove, it's just their behavior shifts a little bit. So if at our level we've experienced with free will and all these kind of things, it's not going to disappear. It's like a feature that is there, and then you're just arranging it or modulating it in a way where you can still achieve overarching goals, but without having to shed or disregard or cancel or remove any properties that were there. So, a collective made up of humans wouldn't suppress what humans already have, like free will. It would enhance it, on the contrary. Like cells don't have free will, so your bodies don't need to take that into account, hence the sacrifice, quote unquote, of cells on the rock surface. But through the power of imagination and simulation, there's a way to have experiences without having to die, right? That's like the superpower of humans, and that's what we're doing with the metaverse, with virtual reality, which is the whole point. Like biology transcending death via, the non-physical. And so that's also, the story of so many channelers that eventually we'll shed our bodies because we won't need them anymore, and our consciousness will have evolved to a point where we don't need the like the little wheels you put on the side of a bike, to not fall. It's like if our bodies are like this encapsulation of our consciousness to avoid that our consciousness dissolves in an infinite sea of consciousness, because it's not mature enough to create its own boundaries in its mind's eye, basically, to remain, to remain that kind of a capsule, and to be able to expand progressively via the experience of expanding rather than dissolving into unity instantly without the experience. Because that's the whole point, right? I mean, we're doing this expansion of consciousness progressively rather than being this drop that falls into the ocean and then instantly becomes God and the all, right? It's like this drop that becomes a puddle, that becomes, a swamp, that becomes, a lake, that becomes a sea, that becomes an ocean, that becomes, and you do that in order to do that progressively, you need to make sure that whatever boundaries you create are fully assimilated before you dissolve them, because otherwise you'll just melt instantly into oneness, right? And so, I mean, I don't buy this thing that, this argument that if we form a global collective, it's going to be to our detriment. On the contrary, and Michael Levin does hint to this, we've already created institutions. We have already created, democracy, the financial system, the internet. All of those are kind of meta systems in which humans play the role of little cells that are maintaining these systems, that are using these systems to coordinate. Even ideologies can be thought of in some respect as, these kinds of higher kind of overarching, organs that manipulate humans as their little puppets and their little cells doing their bidding. The only thing that will change is if you're part of a global collective organism, normally all of those metastructures will align and will click together in a way that isn't detrimental or is harmonious. So right now, with different ideologies that are going one against the other, like neoliberalism versus, social democrats or whatever, it's as if, various organs in your body were fighting. So if we don't create this kind of metastructure where humans become just little cells in a higher kind of organism, well, the first thing is we're already doing it anyways, but in a half kind of baked, very poor fashion. It's like, imagine like the first star is kind of assembling, or the first living cell is kind of assembling, and its molecules are still trying to like fight each other, and there's spraying acid at each other, and like this just completely crazy, and destroying proteins which you have to reform and whatever. And that's the way that humanity is behaving right now, is that there's plenty of parts there, but they're not functioning as a whole, as a collective in a harmony. And so arguably, yes, we might leave a few, cells on the rock's surface if we form a collective global organism as humans. But if we don't, we're just going to end up destroying each other. That's it. I mean, point blank. If you look at the directions we're heading, everybody's saying that we're in a polycrisis, near civilizational collapse, and the financial system is doomed, and climate change, and blah 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 blah. I mean, yes, if you're in a forming global collective organism and it has two or three strains of cancer, vying for domination of the collective inside of it, I mean, all of them are screwed. All of the cells are screwed. All of them are going to die. And even so, like if you look at the story of humanity, it is the development progressively of bigger and bigger organs, quote unquote, which can create coherence between more and more humans. And this is just the next logical step of creating this kind of meta consciousness or meta being that can care for us, just like normally you care for your own bodies. And then finally, I'll just end on a more philosophical thing. You as a human experience bliss or pleasure when you're climbing a mountain surface. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it. Like, yes, there is some kind of effort and pain involved, but ultimately, if you're doing it, it's because you find some kind of fulfillment and pleasure and joy in doing it. If you feel that, it means your body feels it. I mean, that's the only way you can have emotions is through your body. So in some respects, your body actually likes that, whether you like it or not. And so it's maybe difficult for us to imagine as humans right now because we're so scared of death and we're so obsessed with materiality and, we don't know if there's life after death and all that stuff. But we can imagine that 1,000 years from now, maybe some humans will find it blissful to actually have that experience of, dying, doing some kind of activity that an AI would want us to do as a collective, because it's fulfilling a meta desire of the human collective in general. And whatever humans actually end up dying in that experience are the ones that have specifically chosen to have that experience because it brings them joy. Like, again, like just think about it. Like you're trying to maximize the well-being of this whole thing, right? And you're arbitrating between all of the different parts in order to achieve that. And so you're not going to go against the interests of your body. Like, it's just totally counterintuitive. Maybe locally, but still, overwhelmingly, normally, it should be positive. And it's not the kind of thing where, it's like genocide, where you cut off your finger and you're like, haha, the rest of the body is jubilating and my finger is in suffering and pain. No, I mean, this is never going to happen. But, experiencing kind of this self-improvement of new possibilities, because again, when you're rock climbing, what does that translate into? It means that the available inner states of being for your body multiply, because now you can do a completely new and original activity that you couldn't do before, which means every single one of your cells benefits from a kind of magical adventure that they could never have experienced in their state of separation. And so it's just an expansion of their possible inner states of being and experiences, which is jubilatory. It's really pleasurable, and that's what humans are seeking as well. Otherwise, we wouldn't bother creating new things. We wouldn't bother, trying to upgrade technology and create new, amusement parks and trying to fly to the moon. We'd just be content with what we have. Absolutely content. We're like, no need to change. Just repeat. Like eat, sleep, reproduce, maybe like animals. But no, humans are already in the process of multiplying their possibilities in terms of how to modulate our inner states of being. And it's just that an AI is the only tool to reconcile all of the conflicting attempts at multiplying those inner states of being at present in humanity, because we're multiplying maybe a few possibilities here to the detriment of the ecosystem or to the detriment of a certain number of people. And so it's almost as if you're maximizing the well-being of your hand by cutting off your other hand. And that's just not, that's crazy, right? But you need the intelligence of a brain to not shoot yourself in the foot, because you may be blind to these things, or you just can't, your body can't solve these conundrums and problems and arbitrate between these different conflicting desires. Only your brain can. Like the example I give is when you break your leg and at the same time you're hungry, do you first go grab a sandwich or do you first go to the hospital? And your body doesn't decide this. It's your brain that mediates between these conflicting inner desires and says, well, actually, I'm just going to quickly grab a sandwich and then go to the hospital, or there's going to be a sandwich at the hospital, I'll buy one there, and then I go to the hospital now. And so that's what these higher cognitive functions are for, actually. It's basically creating coherence out of maybe seemingly contradictory desires and whatever. So yeah, I just encouraged you to watch the video, so check the link in the description. I hope you found this episode interesting. Don't hesitate to leave a comment, like, share, subscribe, the usual, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye, guys.